It sure seems like Vladimir Putin is now purging, and in that I mean killing, Russian oligarchs and their families. Last week, we told you about 2 of Russia's elite found dead under suspicious circumstances, along with their families. Well, now that number's up to at least 6. Perhaps 1 or 2 mysterious incidents could be chalked up to coincidence. But 6? By now, it is abundantly clear that something very scary is going on. Last week, we covered the deaths of 2 Russian energy executives, which Russia was officially calling murder-suicides. Sergei Protosenya was found dead by authorities in Spain on April 19th, along with his wife and 18-year-old daughter. It happened at the rented villa that they were using about an hour outside of Barcelona. The women had been stabbed in their beds, while Protosenya was found in the courtyard hanging from a tree by his bathrobe. An axe and a knife was found beside Protosenya's body. There were no fingerprints on the weapons. Evidently, nor was there any blood on Protosenya's body from either his wife or his daughter. A day earlier, the bodies of Vladislav Avyev, his reportedly pregnant wife, and the couple's 13-year-old daughter were found in their luxury Moscow apartment. Russian state media reports all 3 members of the family were shot, and investigators claimed Avyev killed his wife and daughter before turning the gun on himself. He was the vice president of a bank owned by Gazprom, a massive Russian energy conglomerate, which single-handedly controls 16% of the entire world's national gas reserves. Now, since we first covered the mysterious deaths of these oligarchs, 2 additional Gazprom executives have been reported dead. Alexander Tulyakov was found hanged in a garage near St. Petersburg, according to a Russian newspaper. Police told the paper that they found a suicide note. But another report claims he was seen badly beaten shortly before his death. And another Gazprom executive, Leonid Shulman, was found dead in a cottage in the very same village back in January. He, too, was said to have penned a suicide note, which cited unbearable pain in his broken leg. But apparently investigators are questioning the authenticity of the note. They're skeptical the pain in his leg would have been a reason for him to kill himself, as they believe he had access to treatment which could have helped him cope with the pain. And in addition to these 4 elites, there was medical supply executive Vasily Melnikov, found stabbed to death, along with his wife and 2 sons, in what Russian authorities are billing another, nothing to see here, murder-suicide, and another oil and gas magnate, Mikhail Watford, who was also hanged in his garage in England. Now, all this surely has certain oligarchs fearing for their lives right now. This has all gone far beyond the plausible realm of coincidence. But I want to know how he is apparently deciding who to kill, where to do it. Joining us now is Louise Shelley, a professor at George Mason University, founder and director of the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center there. She's been studying Russian oligarchs for decades. Thank you for coming on the show. We appreciate it. So we had you on the show last week. At the time, we knew of a couple of dead oligarchs. Now we know of 6. What do you make of the new developments? And do you see any pattern here?
I certainly see a pattern, and it's different from the old Russian playbook, in which individuals were being poisoned with very toxic materials, such as happened with Navalny. Now we have a murder, sort of accusations of murder-suicide, in which you have family members being killed along with the oil and gas executive. And so many of these deaths fit what we would call a new playbook, quite different from the old one.
And why is he trying to make it seem like they killed themselves? I mean, you've got to believe at a certain point that anyone who's looking at this is going to say, well, of course it wasn't a murder-suicide. Of course it wasn't a suicide. Is Putin even trying to cover his tracks?
I think that anybody who looks at these stories questions them. And now that there are 6 murders, and 2 of them are outside of Russia, one in England and one in Spain, you can see that there's something else going on than just a couple deaths, but a series of them over the last few months. And there's certainly a lot of competition and a lot of pressure on the oil and gas sector these days as the world is trying to sanction Russia. And maybe there is something going on behind the scenes that we'll eventually understand of what role these people have played and whether they've been involved in hiding money, whether they've taken money. We just don't know.
Well, why kill the families, too? I mean, that seems to me like you were trying to send a message, right? Trying to send a message of fear. That seems like something, we hear about, in the worst of the worst cases where the brutality extends beyond just killing the person so that others hear about it and get afraid.
I think you've got absolutely the right point there, that this is a message of fear. It's a message of brutality. Earlier, there was a killing or an attempted killing by the Russian security services of Mr. Skripal in England, and his daughter was also affected. But it wasn't intentional that way. But this is so intentional towards family members that I say it's a totally different and new pattern of intimidation and violence.
So could the oligarchs know who's next? I mean, is there enough of a pattern here that if, one of these guys is really afraid for their families, et cetera, they're going to think, okay, I'm probably the next one on this list?
I don't think the pattern is that clear. There are quite a number of oligarchs in the top of the oil and gas sector. So it's curious, who has been selected and why. Maybe there's something known within the community of them that maybe makes them more vulnerable. But to the outside world, it's not apparent.
Have you ever seen anything like this with Putin?
I've seen over a longer period of time that individuals such as Navalny recently have been poisoned with chemicals as weapons, but I haven't seen this kind of brutality. This is something quite new.
Wow. All right. Well, we are certainly going to keep an eye on this. Louise Shelley, thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing your expertise. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.